As we said before, I'm replacing Asma Khalifa, who was originally going to speak about the situation in Libya. And I'm going to speak about the situation in Syria instead. So, firstly, I want to say that I am not an expert on Syria. I don't have any experience from Syria personally. I am a board member at the WILP section of Gothenburg, or in Swedish IFKK. Also, I'm a master's student in political science, and this presentation on Syria is based upon my interest in the matter. So I will start with some brief backgrounds on the Syrian war. It is, as you maybe know, very, very difficult to present this really complex conflict in just a few minutes, but I will try just to give you all one background and context to the situation of women refugees in Syria, or from Syria. So the main parties of the conflict are the Bashar al-Assad regime on the one side and a wide collection of opposition groups on the other side. Commonly claimed is that the start of the conflict was the 5th of March 2011 in Dera, where a group of teens painted some catchphrases from the demonstrations in the surrounding countries before, leading to the Syrian regime taking immediate action and trying to find these perpetrators. There were the teens that had painted these words on the wall. This led to several arrests of teens in the ages of 13 and 15 in this city, and a couple of weeks later there were protests against this abduction of the children, or the teens, and it grew to the first regime-critical demonstration in decades. The regime sent the police and tried to negotiate, but also sent armed forces from Damascus, and when these armed forces started firing into the crowd, killing several demonstrators, that was kind of the tipping point where usually it is said that the conflict started. So, speaking about conflict parties, it's, as I said, really complex. On the one side we have the Assad regime, based on the Ba'athist party, who took power in Syria in 1963. In 1970, the Minister of Defense Hafez al-Assad led another coup, and by that he collected the power around himself, and later on ruled Syria until his death in the year of 2000. The current president, Bashar al-Assad, is, of course, his son, overtook the rule when Hafez al-Assad died in 2000. In the beginning, the general attitude against Bashar al-Assad was hopeful. The world society and Syrians as well really hoped that this was going to lead to some reforms, but unfortunately this soon was disproved. The Assad family belongs to a minority group called the Alawites, who before the breakout of the wars were just a few percent of the Syrian population. It's originally a breakout group from the Shia Muslim, and before the war 3/4 of the population were Sunni Muslims. Also, after the US invasion of Iraq in 2003, a large amount of Iraqi opposition groups entered Syria with the allowance of al-Assad. Further, al-Assad gained the support of both Iran and Russia really early on in the conflict. Talking about the opposition groups in Syria, they have been very fragmented, and it is also a large amount of these different groups many of them also fighting internally and fighting each other. Today there are over 100 armed groups in the conflict, and I don't think that anyone has a real complete list of all the fighting groups. Early in the conflict, it was mainly dominated by moderate and non-religious groups, such as the Free Syrian Army, that consisted of previous regime officers that wanted to overthrow Assad. There are claims that later the Free Syrian Army has been divided into several groups, and however today important fighting groups on the opposition side is the until recently Al-Qaeda allied Al-Nusra Front, who today are independent and under the name of Jabhat Fateh al-Sham, I'm sorry for the pronunciation, and of course ISIL or Daesh. Daesh has the most extensive territorial control, and the al-Assad regime controls largely the western parts of Syria. I have a short video to show you if it works. This is just to show that a lot of different groups are claiming different territories in Syria. I don't hope I'm anyway. Okay, so this is a really good video because it shows a lot of different aspects of Syria in this map way. So it's both the population and different groupings, and also later on here it is the fighting parties of the conflict. So you will see that these are the regime-controlled areas. And the opposition-controlled. It's a lot better with sound, so you can maybe watch it yourself later. This was just to show you that the country of Syria is really fragmented, and the conflict is really complex, and it's a good way to show it by using maps over the conflict. These are the ISIL contested areas. Of course, there are a lot of different maps like this because all of these areas are quite contested as well. You will see also that in the north, mainly the Kurdish forces are claiming territory.
So do they say where the oil
Yes,
sources are?
Yes, yes, they talk about the natural resources, and they talk about a lot later in the video as well. So it's really good. It's called Understanding the Syrian Conflict Using Maps, so you can find it on YouTube yourself. Also, this is another map on the contested areas, and you can see that it's somewhat different, but also somewhat similar to the last one. So of course, this is from Al Jazeera from September this year. But just to show you how complex this conflict is. This is also something that you could look into later if you want to get more knowledge about it. So to continue with the more recent events in the conflict, there's always a lot to say about the events within the conflict, but recently there have been extensive fighting, mainly in and around Aleppo. And on 12th of September there was a ceasefire initiated by the US and Russia, which actually was somewhat followed for around 7 days. However, it's very contested among different groups if this really was the case. And also ISIL, Daesh and the previous Al-Nusra Front were not concerned about this ceasefire. So there are of course, problematics about that as well. After 1 week, the ceasefire was officially over, and the Syrian army claimed that the opposition group had not complied at all. So of course there are different views on this. And just after this, a humanitarian aid convoy was hit in the province of Aleppo, as you may know. Later on, Russian airstrikes continued over Aleppo. For example, the biggest hospital in the country, I think, was destroyed, followed by the US aborting all negotiation with Russia. However, these talks have been resumed again, and on the 20th of October there was an attempt to a humanitarian pause where during 8 hours in order to evacuate injured people from Aleppo. This was followed by 11 hours of ceasefire every day for 3 days, and that is very, very simplified where we are now, actually. So the humanitarian impact of this conflict is, of course, really, really extensive. The Syrian war has claimed numerous victims, and it is very difficult, as most of the cases, to give one comprehensive estimate. But according to the UN, there have been 250,000 deaths, while the Syrian Center for Policy Research claims it to have been 470,000 deaths in February this year. They also claim that 11.5% of the Syrian population has been killed or injured during the conflict. The UNHCR has estimated 4.8 million refugees internationally from the Syrian conflict, as well as 8.7 million, oh, I have written 8.7 IDPs, of course it's 8.7 million internally displaced persons. That is people fleeing inside of Syria. Regarding Europe, the refugee crisis of the Syrian war is the largest one since the Second World War. The EU estimates of refugees, or the EU numbers of refugees between 1994 and 2002 were around 300,000 each year. But this has been replaced by an arrival of asylum seekers, reaching to 663,000 in 2014, and in 2015 the IOM, the International Organization for Migration, estimated almost over 1 million refugees coming to Europe. Also, UNHCR's figures from August 2016 estimates that there have been 1,151,865 Syrian asylum applications in Europe since April 2011. So that kind of shows how enormous this humanitarian crisis is.